security needs and Palestinian aspirations for statehood and sovereignty, end the occupation that began in 1967, and resolve all permanent status issues. Excellencies, the path to peace is not easy, but the time to take the first steps towards it is now. It requires, firstly, an urgent, unconditional and permanent ceasefire in Gaza, and the unconditional release of all hostages taken by Hamas and other groups. The Israeli government must immediately lift restrictions on the flow of aid to meet the needs of the civilian population. These need to happen immediately. The humanitarian situation in Gaza has gone beyond comprehension. The war in Gaza must end now. Secondly, we must further strengthen the Palestinian Authority, which has for decades stood for a peaceful approach to the two-state solution. This requires a clear political horizon for the Palestinians to determine their own affairs in an independent state of Palestine, living side by side in peace and security and mutual recognition with the State of Israel. This also requires ensuring that the Palestinian Authority has the financial means to develop the Palestinian society, including through freeing the clearance revenues that belong to it. We also need a credible process that brings the entire occupied Palestinian territory, Gaza and the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, under a unified Palestinian Authority. Thirdly, no peace can be sustainable and lasting unless Israel's security is fully ensured. Hamas must be disarmed. The process towards a two-state solution must also bring about further recognitions of the State of Israel by countries in the region and beyond. In parallel, it is paramount to refrain from measures that undermine the viability of a two-state solution. Continued settlement construction, the absence of accountability for acts of violence, and restrictions on the Palestinian Authority's ability to function effectively all contribute to mistrust and instability. A lasting peace requires that all parties take meaningful steps to uphold international law and foster conditions conducive to dialogue, cooperation, and mutual security. Excellencies, Finland is firmly committed to the two-state solution. We have been supporting Palestinian state-building efforts both politically and through development cooperation for decades. It is time to take concrete steps towards implementing the two-state solution for the benefit of Palestinians, Israelis, and the entire Middle East region. Finland stands ready to do its part.
I thank His Excellency, the Permanent State Minister of Finland. I now give the floor to His Excellency Joost Flemende, Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Kingdom of the Netherlands.
Your Excellencies, an independent, viable Palestinian state alongside a secure Israel. Some may call it a delusion, a myth, or mere democratic theatrics. But for the Netherlands, it remains the core principle guiding all efforts to resolve this deep-rooted conflict in the Middle East. The brutal attacks by Hamas on the 7th of October 2023 ushered in a period of excessive violence, enormous human suffering in Gaza, and ever-deepening division between Israelis and Palestinians. Last year, during a visit to the Netherlands, Palestinian peace activist Hiba Husseini remarked that many have lost hope, yet she hasn't. Ms. Husseini was being honored alongside Israeli Yossi Beilin for her persistent efforts to achieve a lasting solution to the conflict. Ms. Husseini said, "Yossi and I will never give up. For parents who continue to hope for a peaceful future for their children, and for us Palestinians who long for an end to the occupation. And this is precisely why we must persist in our decades-long pursuit of a two-state solution. Efforts to achieve stability and peace are now more essential than ever. At the same time, it's obvious that we're facing huge obstacles. The war and the catastrophic humanitarian situation in Gaza are at the forefront of everybody's minds. To stop the immense suffering, it is crucial that the negotiations for an immediate ceasefire are resumed. The people of Gaza must receive the help they so urgently need: food, medicines, and fuel. The humanitarian blockade of Gaza is a violation of international law and is simply unacceptable. In this light, the recent EU agreement with Israel to ensure that aid is delivered to people across Gaza is crucial. Announcements have been made in recent days regarding access to humanitarian aid. Words must now be converted to action and results. The grave needs in the Gaza Strip can only be countered with large-scale humanitarian assistance by land. We call on Israel to guarantee unhindered and unconditional humanitarian access for professional, mandated organizations such as the UN. Another major obstacle to solving the conflict is the Israeli settlement policy. These policies include steps and statements that allude to annexation of the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, such as approving additional funding for settlement infrastructure and the decision to proceed with the E1 settlement plan. We strongly urge the Israeli authorities to reverse these policies. At the same time, we have to acknowledge that Hamas remains a serious threat to Israel. Currently, Hamas still holds 50 hostages, no more than 22 of whom are believed to be still alive. Also, this ongoing nightmare has to stop. Hamas must immediately and unconditionally release all Israeli hostages in Gaza, must lay down its arms, and cannot be part of any future government in Gaza. And despite all these challenges, it's important to continue efforts for the state-building process on the Palestinian side. Over the years, the Netherlands has invested in the Palestinian water, energy, and economic sectors. And this May, the Netherlands and Morocco jointly organized a meeting of the Global Alliance for the Implementation of the Two-State Solution. It was the first meeting of the alliance to be organized jointly by both an Arab country and a European one, which shows how important it is to keep building bridges. And one of the conclusions was that it's crucial to keep strengthening Palestinian institutions and working towards a viable economy. Equally vital is the removal of restrictive measures imposed by the Israeli authorities, including the ongoing threats to suspend the essential banking waiver and the withholding of Palestinian tax revenues. These tax revenues belong to the Palestinian people and are crucial to sustaining their economy. We call on Israel to release them without delay. A well-functioning Palestinian Authority which provides healthcare, education, safety and security to millions of Palestinians is in the interest of both parties. It's also in the interest of Israel's security, which the Netherlands fully supports. Ladies and gentlemen, last year, referring to a two-state solution, the Israeli author David Grossman said, "If we totally lose hope, then we are defeated. Defeated in a way, deeper way than losing a war." His words are a strong appeal to continue our efforts by persisting and working together with strong individuals like Yossi Beilin and Hiba Husseini in the Middle East. The vast majority of Israelis and Palestinians just want peace, and we must make every effort to revive the peace process and bring that peace closer. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency, Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Kingdom of Netherlands. I now give the floor to His Excellency Julius Pranevičius, Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs of Lithuania.
Your Excellencies, co-chairs, I would like to express appreciation to France and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia for organizing this important conference, as mandated by General Assembly resolution of December last year, which Lithuania has supported. I also thank the UN Secretary General and President of the UN General Assembly for their remarks. From the outset, I underline Lithuania's full support for all efforts aimed at achieving lasting peace and security in the Middle East. Lithuania also welcomes further steps towards reviving a political process to implement the two-state solution. This envisions the State of Israel and an independent, democratic, contiguous, sovereign, and viable state of Palestine living side by side in peace and security, with mutual recognition, and with Jerusalem serving as the future capital of both states. The role of the Palestinian Authority is key to achieving this goal. Lithuania is committed to continuing to assist the state-building efforts of the Palestinian Authority through Team Europe initiatives, EU twinning projects, as well as bilateral cooperation. Lithuania has implemented or is implementing 21 national development cooperation projects in Palestine so far, and will continue its support in line with its development cooperation strategy for the Middle East 2022-2025 and beyond. Lithuania looks forward to new partnerships in various fields such as ICT, fintech, women's digital empowerment, environment and recycling, and others. Another key element in implementing the two-state solution is Israel's participation. Lithuania expects that a way can be found to address legitimate Israeli concerns and have them join this initiative in the future. For example, the international community's position regarding Hamas, which poses an existential threat to Israel, could be clearly mentioned in the outcome document of the conference. We call for international consensus that, by resorting to terrorism and hostage-taking, Hamas has become a major obstacle to the two-state solution and cannot be part of the future Palestinian state. Furthermore, we strongly condemn the further escalation in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, following increased settler violence, the expansion of illegal settlements, and continuing Israeli military operations. At the same time, we strongly condemn the increased terrorist attacks against Israel. Your Excellencies, Lithuania fully shares the grave concerns of the international community regarding the humanitarian and human rights situation in the occupied Palestinian territory. It is unimaginable that in the 21st century, people in Gaza, and particularly children, are facing hunger. They are prevented from accessing medical treatment, schools, and other social infrastructure. This must stop immediately. In June, Lithuania supported the UNGA resolution, protection of civilians, and upholding legal and humanitarian obligations, covering these issues, as well as terrorist attacks and hostage-taking by Hamas, illegal settlements, expansion, and settler violence, mass displacements, hate speech, and anti-Semitism. Lithuania supports the UN aid delivery system and pays tribute to the fallen humanitarian workers. The numbers are shocking during this tragic war. Foremost, it is an obligation of the parties to the conflict to always ensure the safety of humanitarian workers. Lithuania joins calls to all parties to respect international humanitarian law and to return to the full implementation of the ceasefire agreement. Humanitarian aid should resume without hindrance, and Israeli hostages should be immediately released. Lithuania strongly supports the ongoing mediation efforts by the USA, Qatar, and Egypt. Any decision regarding the future of the Gaza Strip must be based solely on international law. Lithuania welcomes the Arab Recovery and Reconstruction Plan endorsed at the Cairo Summit on 4th March 2025. We will continue providing humanitarian aid to Palestinians through the UN systems. Your Excellencies, I appreciate the hard work done in the working groups and the co-chairs regarding these and other aspects, as well as the input from civil society. Wishing this conference every success, I reiterate Lithuania's constructive support to further efforts in this regard. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs of Lithuania, and I give the floor to His Excellency Vahan Kostanyan, Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs of Armenia.
Honorable co-chairs, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, I would like to start by thanking France and Kingdom of Saudi Arabia for initiating this conference on the implementation of the two-state solution in the time what is most needed to pave the way for a lasting peace in the Middle East. Armenia does believe that only two independent neighbor states can guarantee long-lasting stability, security, peace, and prosperity for both Palestinian and also Israeli people, where all enjoy the benefits of peaceful coexistence. With this in mind, being always a supporter of two-state solution, in June 2024, Armenia recognized the state of Palestine, and later, under the auspices of 79th session of UNGA, established diplomatic relations. In this regard, Armenia welcomes the announcement of President of France, Emmanuel Macron, and recent statement by the United Kingdom on intention to recognize the independent state of Palestine. We are also particularly proud that foreign ministers of France and Palestine had a chance to meet in Armenia in the margins of Yerevan Dialogue Diplomatic Forum, paving a way for historic development. Based on our own experience, Armenia clearly knows what the horror of war is. Despite the limited resources, we have been trying to support the needs of Palestinian people. Based on the agreement of President of Egypt and Prime Minister of Armenia, we sent humanitarian aid to Gaza. We do also support the activities of UNRWA. Taking the chance, allow me also to announce that we reached an agreement with Palestine that Matena Daran, Armenian Institute of Ancient Manuscripts, will temporarily become a shelter for Palestinian endangered cultural heritage. Dear colleagues, Armenia also emphasizes the importance of ensuring safety, security, and full rights of Christian communities in both states. As one of the world's oldest Christian nations, we attach particular significance to the preservation of a Christian heritage in the Holy Land. Armenia hopes that of a historic status quo arrangement governing the Christian holy sites in Jerusalem will be protected and fully respected as a cornerstone of interreligious harmony and peaceful coexistence. Mr. Co-Chair, ever since the 7th October 2023 horrendous attack with unspeakable scenes of violence, slaughter, and hostage-taking, which we condemn in the strongest terms, we have been witnessing the worst escalation in the region, with terrible tragedy unfolding for millions of innocent civilians, women, children, and elderly. All the calamities that we are witnessing have a clear solution. The hostilities should stop, the ceasefire should be put in place and reinforced to prevent further bloodshed. All detainees and hostages should be immediately and unconditionally released while ensuring the flow of humanitarian aid and relief. Most importantly, the negotiations should be considered the only and viable way of securing a lasting and dignified peace in the Middle East, rested on the two-state solution. Allow me to conclude by thanking once again France and Saudi Arabia for leading this important conference and express our strong support as a nation, which is a part of a fabric of the region for lasting peace and prosperity in the Middle East. I thank you.
I thank His Excellency Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs of Armenia, and I give the floor to His Excellency Samir Sharifov, Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs of Azerbaijan.
Honorable Chairs, distinguished Secretary General, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to express my gratitude for this timely initiative of convening high-level international conference for the peaceful settlement of the question of Palestine and the implementation of the two-state solution at this critical juncture. For decades, the international community has shown its steadfast commitment to a comprehensive, just, and a lasting solution to the question of Palestine in accordance with international law, the Charter of United Nations, and the relevant UN resolutions. These resolutions serve as a cornerstone of our collective pursuit of a two-state solution, with Israel and Palestine living side by side in peace and security. The ongoing escalation in the Israeli-Palestine conflict zone that continue to claim innocent lives once again highlights an immediate need for a just and lasting solution to this issue based on the principal position. In this context, Azerbaijan reaffirmed its unwavering support for the two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, with the East Jerusalem as the capital of the State of Palestine, in accordance with international law and relevant UN resolutions. It's crucial to emphasize that ensuring the inalienable right of the Palestinian people to live in security and dignity within their own state is the only viable path that would bring the long-awaited peace and stability to the region. We have to unite our efforts to urgently de-escalate the situation on the ground. All actors must exercise restraints and refrain from actions that could further escalate the situation. The principles of sovereignty, territorial integrity, and the prohibition of the use of force, as enshrined in the Charter of United Nations, must be upheld. Any violation of these fundamental principles must cease unconditionally and without delay. In light of the latest developments, Azerbaijan called for the full-fledged ceasefire that must be duly honored and sustained. At the same time, the ceasefire should not be an end in itself, but rather a step forward for initiating a lasting peace process in the region based on the international law and the legitimate aspiration of the Palestinian people. As we gather in the August body, thousands of people in the state of Palestine find themselves in a dire humanitarian situation, facing severe shortages of essential supplies, including food, water, and medical care, exacerbated by restrictions on the movement of goods and people. We are deeply concerned by the deteriorating situation on the ground and the immense suffering of the countless innocent civilians and the destruction of essential infrastructure. It is now more urgent than ever for the international community to take coordinated action to prevent further loss of life and to assist those in need. Over the decades, and particularly in this challenging time, we have stood with the brotherly people of the State of Palestine, sparing no effort to foster critical and aid and support through bilateral and multilateral channels. In the last 2 years alone, Azerbaijan has demonstrated solidarity with the State of Palestine by providing humanitarian assistance worth $2 million to support the people affected by the crisis. Beyond the humanitarian aid, Azerbaijan continues to support the Palestinian people in education and healthcare. In this regard, Azerbaijan provided scholarship to 15 Palestinian students under the Hijr International Education Grant Program for 2024-2025. Furthermore, Azerbaijan pledged to build a school in Nablus for 600 students. Excellencies, let this conference renew our shared commitment to a future when two sovereign states coexist in peace and security. We must transform our political will into a concerted action that uphold the UN Charter and work collectively to fully implement the two-state solution. Azerbaijan remains fully committed to contributing to efforts that promote dialogue, reconciliation, and the just and lasting resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I thank you.
I thank His Excellency, Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs of Azerbaijan. I now give the floor to Her Excellency Monika Schmutz-Kirogut, State Secretary and Head of Middle East and North Africa Division at the Federal Department of Foreign Affairs of Switzerland.
Messieurs les co-présidents,
Co-chairs, ministers, excellencies. Switzerland would like to thank France and Saudi Arabia for organizing this conference and for their efforts in support of peace. Since the acts of terror perpetrated by Hamas on October 7, 2023, which we strongly condemned, millions of civilians have been suffering from the intensification of hostilities. Switzerland condemns all violations of international law, including international humanitarian law, committed by all parties. We are horrified by the suffering endured by civilians in Gaza, who are subjected to relentless hostilities and forced displacement. The worst-case scenario, that of famine, is currently unfolding in the Strip. This situation is intolerable and urgent action is needed. Switzerland calls for an immediate and permanent ceasefire, the unconditional and immediate release of all hostages, and for safe, rapid, and unimpeded humanitarian access to all civilians in need. Israel, as the occupying power, must respect its obligations under international law, in particular with regard to the provision of the supplies to the population under its control. This includes the immediate and permanent lifting of all restrictions, including on civil society, to allow international organizations, non-governmental organizations, and the media to carry out their work safely and effectively. Israel's recent decision to support increased humanitarian aid is a minimal step forward. Much more is needed. Aid must be able to reach all the population in need in sufficient quantities. In the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, the situation is also dramatic, including the continued expansion of settlements against a backdrop of military escalation and increasing violence perpetrated by Israeli settlers with complete impunity. We call for an end to all these violations and for them to be investigated. Co-chairs. There is no military solution to the vicious cycle in the Middle East. On the one hand, it is essential that all parties strictly respect international law, including international humanitarian law, the Charter of the United Nations, and the resolutions of the Security Council and this Assembly. This is necessary to ensure the protection of civilians, including humanitarian actors, and to guarantee the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and independence of all countries in the region. On the other hand, a political perspective must be restored, and the two-state solution must finally be achieved through diplomatic means. Switzerland contributed in the preparations for this conference and commends the work of the co-chairs and member states. We helped to formulate concrete proposals to remove obstacles to peace. These obstacles include the Israeli occupation, including settlements which are illegal, as concluded by the International Court of Justice. Plans to annex the Gaza Strip and the West Bank are contrary to law. The occupation must end. Switzerland calls on all parties to engage seriously in the search for lasting peace in the Middle East. In this regard, it welcomes the commitment of the Palestinian Authority, in particular its reform efforts and its efforts to return to Gaza. We remain determined to support the efforts of the international community to implement the two-state solution in line with the objective of this conference. Switzerland is, for instance, active in the humanitarian field and in strengthening the Palestinian Authority's civil services in Gaza with a view to establishing a unified and sustainable administration. We also find the idea of drawing inspiration from regional approaches, including those developed within the OSCE, interesting. Switzerland will therefore continue to explore this potential with a view to a peaceful solution in the Middle East. Our good offices also remain at the disposal of the parties. Dialogue is essential for the resolution of this conflict. Discussions are needed between Israelis and Palestinians and between Israel and the Arab League for mutual recognition, normalization of relations, as well as cooperation between all states in the region based on the Arab Peace Initiative. For Switzerland, bilateral recognition of Palestine must be part of ensuring a lasting peace based on the two-state solution. It could be considered once concrete steps towards this solution, guaranteeing both Israel's security and the Palestinian people's right to self-determination, begin to be implemented. Switzerland remains convinced. The two-state solution is the only way for Israelis and Palestinians to live side by side in peace, security, and dignity, within secure and recognized borders in accordance with international law and internationally agreed parameters. This conference is the first step in our joint and determined commitment to a peaceful, secure, and dignified future for the people of the Middle East. Thank you very much.
I thank State Secretary and Head of the Middle East and North Africa Division at the Federal Department of Foreign Affairs of Switzerland. I now give the floor to His Excellency Sergei Vershinin, Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation.
Уважаемые господа сопредседатели.
Honorable co-chairs, ladies and gentlemen, this week, with the delay of nearly a month and a half, we are holding a high-level international conference in support of the two-state solution to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. Events in the Middle East, an unprecedented crisis and significant escalation of violence have once again demonstrated that without a just and lasting solution to the question of Palestine, there will be no genuine peace and security in the region. Over the nearly 2 years that have passed, we have witnessed bloodshed, famine, attacks, and invasions on sovereign states' territories, all in violation of the fundamental principles of the UN Charter, norms of international law, and the basic tenets of the nuclear non-proliferation regime. Continuing down this erroneous and dangerous path risks bringing about the most unpredictable and devastating consequences. Meetings and conferences can be delayed. However, the Palestinians in Gaza, the West Bank, and East Jerusalem can no longer wait. The realization of their legitimate aspirations to their own sovereign state and the guarantee of their fundamental rights to self-determination and return have already been postponed for an unacceptably long 80 years. As is well known, the two-state solution was laid out in the very first relevant UN decision on the matter, Resolution 181 of the UN General Assembly of 1947, which proposed the partition of Palestine into two states, one Jewish and one Arab, with Jerusalem designated as a separate entity under a special international regime. However, of the two states envisioned in that resolution, only one, Israel, was created. The USSR was the first country to recognize Israel both de facto and de jure, establishing diplomatic relations with it almost immediately after its declaration of independence on May 14, 1948. At the same time, Moscow has consistently supported and continues to support the creation of an independent and viable Palestinian state within 1967 borders, with East Jerusalem as its capital, capable of coexisting with Israel in peace and security. The State of Palestine has had an embassy in Moscow since 1990. Russia's recognition of Palestinian statehood, like its recognition by dozens of other states, was not done for applause, but in the interest of the two-state solution, and has genuinely helped preserve it. Russia reaffirmed its support for Palestinian statehood along with 146 other countries during the UN General Assembly vote in May 2024 on granting the Palestinian delegation full member state status in the United Nations. What is taking place today in the occupied Palestinian territory, as has been rightly noted, is beyond vocabulary. We are witnessing a tragic unfolding of mass dehumanization, suffering, immense casualties, and destruction. Russia has repeatedly stated the Hamas attack and taking of hostages, many of which remain captive, deserve unequivocal condemnation and denunciation. However, that attack cannot be used as a pretext for the collective punishment of millions of Palestinians over the course of 21 months, nor should it be used as a reason to provoke a major regional war. The number of Palestinian casualties is shocking, with over 60,000 killed and 42,000 injured. As Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov emphasized a year ago during the quarterly UN Security Council debate on the Middle East, that number is several times higher than the casualties from 11 years of conflict in southeastern Ukraine, a conflict that, unlike the one in Palestine, Western delegations spare no words nor emotions to describe. In Gaza, in addition to those killed and wounded by mass bombings and victims of epidemics and famine, there are now those who have been shot dead while waiting for food rations. In the words of UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, Gaza had already become a graveyard for children in November 2023, and today starvation is knocking on every door. The UN World Food Programme reports that 1 in 3 residents of the enclave is starving. From March 2nd until May 19th, Gaza was under a full blockade, and now people are forced to choose between dying from hunger or waiting in line for paltry rations. In the West Bank, military raids are compounded by settler violence, which continues with impunity. The pace of Israeli settlement and outpost construction and expansion, along with the expropriation and destruction of Palestinian property, has long broken every record. Against this backdrop, Israel is announcing plans to annex the West Bank, calling for the resettlement of Gaza, and legislatively affirming its rejection of a Palestinian state. For Palestinians, this will mean one thing: another catastrophe and expulsion. Ladies and gentlemen, we must particularly acknowledge the courage and resilience of humanitarian staff who continue to provide aid to those affected and in need despite all odds. Since the beginning of the current crisis, 483 people have been killed, including 326 UN staff members, many along with their families. We express our condolences to their relatives, loved ones, and colleagues. This is the largest loss the United Nations has suffered since its founding 80 years ago. We must also warn against the harassment of staff members of the UN and its specialized agencies who have been deemed undesirable. This is a direct violation of the UN Charter and member states' obligations under the Convention on Privileges and Immunities. Colleagues, there is only one way out of this bloody impasse: an immediate and comprehensive ceasefire, the unconditional release of hostages and detainees, ensuring safe and unhindered humanitarian access, relaunching the peace process on a universally recognized international legal basis centered around the two-state solution, with Israel and Palestine living side by side in peace and security. We consistently uphold these principled approaches, which have formed the foundation of Russia's position throughout the conflict and will remain unaffected by short-term political fluctuations. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation. I give the floor to His Excellency Frano Matusic, State Secretary for Political Affairs of Croatia.
Thank you, honorable co-chairs, esteemed colleagues. Our sincere thanks to the organizers of this important conference. Dear colleagues, the fact that we have gathered here today sends a strong and hopeful signal. There is political will and goodwill in the international community to move towards a long-term, viable solution for a just, lasting, and sustainable peace in the context of Israeli and Palestinian relations and two-state solution. The extreme suffering of so many people, civilians, especially children, and the ever more alarming humanitarian situation in Gaza demands our urgent action. Croatia will continue to provide all the necessary humanitarian aid bilaterally and through international organizations, protecting the most vulnerable population in Gaza, especially children and women. So far, we have supported the civilians of Gaza with 3 million euros of humanitarian aid and with the donation of 400 tons of flour, and will continue on that good path. In this regard, Croatia is ready to offer psychological rehabilitation to children from Gaza by hosting them in Croatia and ensure safe environment, since the war deprived them of their rights to play, study, and be children. On political ground, we support the engagement of the United States of America together with Egypt and Qatar in reaching for a ceasefire as a decisive step. No matter how difficult it might seem to reach it, the work toward the ceasefire needs to continue, and no effort should be spared. The fact that we have gathered at the UN headquarters confirms our collective resolve to support a viable solution to the conflict that has been in the world media headlines for years, even decades. The solution must guarantee peace, security, and dignity for both Israelis and Palestinians, and their mutual recognition, which would stabilize the wider region and, in a certain extent, the world. The time has come, as we heard in the intervention yesterday and today, to move beyond declarations of support for a two-state solution and launch an agenda of actions that will lead to establishing a dialogue between the two sides. We condemn every single civilian casualty and every single hostage taken. The unconditional and immediate release of all hostages remains the highest priority. Hamas should not have a role in the future of Gaza, and it should be disarmed. The future success of these initiatives, dear ministers and colleagues, will depend on each and every one of us and our dedication to engaging on both the regional and international level. Our commitment to assisting in mediation, supporting reforms, institution building and strengthening of Palestinian authorities, as well as providing the necessary political and economic backing for peace to take root, is very much needed. The process must be grounded in international law, including the UN Charter and the relevant UN resolutions, and guided by universal values. These are not optional ideals, but foundational principles. Dear co-chairs, colleagues, dialogue is not a sign of weakness, but the essence of statesmanship. All lasting solutions need political will, matched with a forward-looking vision and readiness for compromise. The people of the region have endured generations of loss. They deserve a future of peace and coexistence, not in theory, but in practice. We have gathered here to commit to turning these shared aspirations into meaningful progress. The alternative, continued division, despair, and destruction, no one can afford. I thank you.
I thank His Excellency State Secretary for Political Affairs of Croatia. I now give the floor to His Excellency Kovinciok, Deputy Secretary for Asia and the Pacific from Singapore.
Your Excellencies, let me begin by thanking the co-chairs, France and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, for convening this important meeting to galvanize support for the implementation of the two-state solution. Allow me also to thank all the co-chairs of the various working groups for their hard work. What we are witnessing in Gaza today is heartbreaking. The denial of humanitarian aid is causing starvation and a dire lack of essential medical services. The reports of people being shot while desperately trying to access food are shocking. This is unconscionable and a violation of international humanitarian law. We call on the Israeli government to immediately lift all restrictions on the delivery of urgently needed humanitarian assistance. The UN and humanitarian NGOs must be allowed to resume their humanitarian mission unimpeded. We must do all we can to prevent a further loss of life on both sides. In this regard, Singapore reiterates its call for an immediate ceasefire. We also call on Hamas to release all the remaining hostages immediately and unconditionally. Singapore remains committed to help alleviate the humanitarian suffering in Gaza. To date, we have contributed over $17 million in monetary and in-kind assistance. We have worked with our regional partners, as well as organizations like UNICEF and UNRWA, to do what we can to help. Looking ahead, we are considering the deployment of a medical team to the region to help treat patients from Gaza. In the longer term, we are prepared to contribute to the reconstruction of Gaza once a permanent ceasefire agreement is reached. In this context, we support the Arab Reconstruction Plan and its vision for reconstruction in Gaza as proposed by Egypt. Singapore also remains committed to supporting the Palestinian Authority's capacity building efforts through our $7 million enhanced technical assistance package. As part of this effort, we have increased the number of scholarships for Palestinians to study in Singapore universities. We will also launch 2 new initiatives next year. First, we will collaborate with Japan to train Palestinian civil police officers in community policing. Second, we will launch a new Young Leaders program to share our experiences in administration and governance, public administration and governance. We hope that these efforts will help prepare Palestinians for their eventual statehood. Excellencies, Singapore has consistently supported the right of Palestinians to their own homeland based on a negotiated 2-state solution, consistent with the relevant UNSC resolutions. We firmly believe that this is the only viable pathway to achieving a comprehensive, just, and durable solution to this long-standing conflict. To this end, we are prepared, in principle, to recognize the state of Palestine. The key consideration is that such a move should help progress towards peace and a negotiated 2-state solution. There must be an effective Palestinian government in place that also categorically renounces terrorism and accepts Israel's right to exist. We therefore welcome Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas's letter dated 9th June 2025, which reiterated inter alia the Palestinian Authority's continued rejection of violence and terrorism, its long-standing recognition of Israel's right to exist, and its commitment to the implementation of its reform agenda. We hope that these commitments can be implemented fully. Finally, we urge the Israelis and Palestinians to return to the negotiating table and make necessary, albeit difficult, concessions. To continue on the current trajectory will only make the goal of peace even more difficult to achieve and result in an endless cycle of violence and mutual hatred. Both sides must have the courage to break this vicious cycle. Thank you very much.
I thank His Excellency Deputy Secretary for Asia and the Pacific at the Foreign Ministry of Singapore, and I give the floor to His Excellency Hong Viet Du, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of Vietnam.
Distinguished co-chairs, Excellencies, the Palestinian question remains one of the most enduring and urgent challenges on the international agenda. For over 7 decades, it has been a measure of our collective conscience and a test of the credibility of the international rules-based order. Despite sustained diplomatic efforts, despite rulings of the International Court of Justice, and despite many UN resolutions. The two-state solution has yet to be realized, and today seems even further from reach. Vietnam therefore welcomes and thanks the co-chairs France and Saudi Arabia for convening this high-level conference. Yesterday, Minister Jean-Noël Barrot of France said in his opening remarks something that I cannot agree more with. He said, quote, "Because there is nothing more precious to man than the dignity of standing free and upright on the land in which his roots are embedded, because depriving him of this right inevitably leads to resentment, violence, and war," unquote. Vietnam knows this as a matter of fact. We know this from our own history, a history of struggles against colonialism, foreign aggression and occupation, a history of struggles to defend our national sovereignty and territorial integrity, and struggles for our right to self-determination, independence, freedom, and reunification. And it is this history that informs our unwavering support for the struggles of the Palestinian people. Vietnam was among the first countries to recognize the state of Palestine more than 37 years ago. We support the two-state solution based on the pre-1967 borders and international law, ensuring a sovereign, viable state of Palestine coexisting in peace and security with Israel. We believe there is no other alternative, and we consistently support Palestine's full membership in the United Nations. Co-chairs, the ongoing war in Gaza and its broader regional implication may make the prospect of a two-state solution seem hopeless. But here again, our history, the history of Vietnam's relations with France, with the United States, may give us some hope. From bloody wars and bitter enemies, we have together built comprehensive strategic partnerships and fostered friendships that connect our peoples and our countries. Vietnam has a strong belief that peace will prevail, the will of the people will prevail, and reconciliation is possible. With that hope and that strong belief, we urge all parties to return to genuine negotiations in accordance with international law, the UN Charter, and relevant UN resolutions to address the root causes of the conflict and pave the way for a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace for the people of Palestine, for the people of Israel, for the region, and for the world. I thank you very much.
I thank His Excellency Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of Vietnam. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, speaking on behalf of the Group of Friends in Defense of the Charter of the United Nations.
Señores copresidentes.
Co-chairs, the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela regrets that it has not been able to participate at ministerial level at this important meeting due to the host country's refusal to issue visas to our delegation. We make this statement on behalf of the Group of Friends in Defense of the Charter of the United Nations, whose member states are steadfastly committed to ensuring that this conference brings us closer to ending one of the most painful conflicts of our time. Co-chairs, we reaffirm our full support for the just cause of Palestine, as well as our unwavering solidarity with the Palestinian people in their ongoing struggle to realize their inalienable right to self-determination and freedom, including independence in their sovereign and viable state of Palestine, based on the pre-1967 borders, and with East Jerusalem as their capital in accordance with relevant United Nations resolutions and on the basis of the two-state solution. A first practical step to remedy decades of occupation, displacement, colonization, annexation, and brutal violence and systemic impunity against the Palestinian people would be the immediate admission of the State of Palestine as a fully fledged member of the UN. This would, in turn, constitute a concrete affirmation of the Palestinian people's inalienable right to self-determination. Co-chairs, the very essence of this conference, rooted in the political and moral authority of the General Assembly, is a timely and necessary manifestation of multilateralism in action. It reflects our common responsibility to achieve peace through the pursuit of a just, comprehensive and lasting peace to the question of Palestine in all of its aspects, including the situation of Palestinian refugees and the realization of their right to return. In this regard, we value the work of the 8 pre-established working groups whose respective thematic areas reflect the multidimensional nature of this protracted conflict and the urgent need to take coordinated measures. We further insist that the socio-economic viability of a future Palestinian state, as well as the provision of humanitarian assistance and sustained reconstruction, must be fundamental priorities for post-conflict recovery. To this end, we support the Arab and OIC plan for relief and rapid recovery in Gaza in full coordination with the State of Palestine. Co-chairs, allow us now very specifically to highlight 4 general principles that should guide our collective vision to resolving a matter that remains a profound stain on the conscience of the international community and the very credibility of the international system. 1. Peace through justice and not through force. There can be no sustainable peace without justice. This requires full respect for and implementation of international law, as well as an end to impunity. Accountability is crucial for deterrence, reconciliation, and lasting peace. 2. Palestinian sovereignty and the right to self-determination. We reject any attempt to alter the demographic or territorial character of the occupied Palestinian territory, including all unilateral and illegal measures aimed at creating facts on the ground through illegal settlements, forced displacement, and annexation plans, all of which end up undermining the viability of the two-state solution. 3. Narratives of peace, dignity, and coexistence. It is urgent to take educational and diplomatic steps that reject exclusion, discrimination, inequality, intolerance, and supremacy of any kind. These are measures that promote tolerance, understanding, and respect, particularly among younger generations, on the basis of full respect for human rights and human dignity. 4. International responsibility and action. Here, the Security Council must act in a concerted manner to fully exercise its responsibilities, not only to address the current crisis, but also, once and for all, to resolve this conflict. We call on the United States to end its complicity with Israel through the protection that it affords via the recurrent use of the veto. Inaction, paralysis, or the selective application of Security Council resolutions on the question of Palestine only serve to fuel impunity. Co-chairs, bearing all of the aforementioned in mind, we stress the urgent importance of achieving an immediate, unconditional, permanent and fully respected ceasefire, as well as the need to adopt urgent measures to halt the supply or transfer of weapons, ammunition and related equipment to Israel in all cases where there are reasonable grounds to suspect that they may be used in the OPT. This, it's important to stress, is of utmost importance to create the necessary conditions on the ground to facilitate the work of humanitarian actors in delivering rapid and unhindered support and assistance to Palestinian civilians that are most in need in a coherent, safe and scalable way. We also take this opportunity once again to call for the release of all hostages and detainees, including the thousands of Palestinians who have been held for years in Israeli prisons and detention centers. Co-chairs, we reiterate that the implementation of the two-state solution is not merely a political objective or a diplomatic aspiration. Rather, it is a legal and moral imperative, fundamental to preserving peace, dignity and justice for all peoples in the region. It is testament to our collective determination to uphold the international order rooted in the principles enshrined in the founding charter of our organization, and to reaffirm the fundamental promise of the United Nations. That is, that all peoples, irrespective of their power or geographic location, have the right to live in freedom, dignity, and peace. Therefore, we call on all parties to engage constructively in this historic gathering and to translate the proposals and outcomes of this conference into tangible progress on the ground, so as to finally achieve justice and peace. Let us act decisively, guided by the principles enshrined in the UN Charter and by our collective political, legal and moral obligations on the question of Palestine. Let us act to bring an end to impunity, to restore hope, and to preserve a political horizon and realize the long-postponed promise of a just peace for the Palestinian people and for the entire Middle East region. Thank you very much, co-chairs.
I thank the distinguished representative of Venezuela. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Uganda on behalf of the Non-Aligned Movement.
Co-chairs, Excellencies, I'm honored to deliver this statement on behalf of the 121 member states of the Non-Aligned Movement NAM at this important high-level conference on Palestine and the two-state solution. NAM welcomes the convening of the high-level international conference on the implementation of the resolutions pertaining to the question of Palestine and the two-state solution in line with UNGA Resolution ES 1024 and all relevant resolutions. We welcome the strong and principled position affirmed in the roundtables preceding this plenary debate. NAM commends the efforts undertaken within the framework of the Global Alliance for the implementation of the two-state solution under the chairmanship of Saudi Arabia, EU, and Norway, and urges concrete follow-up of these important initiatives. NAM reaffirms its long-standing common and principled position on the question of Palestine and is deeply concerned about the implications of the conflict in Gaza to the region and the continuation of this illegal occupation. There has been no reprieve to the grave situation in Gaza, and the conflict has intensified, worsening the catastrophic humanitarian situation, not only in Gaza, but also in the rest of the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem. The members of the United Nations conferred on the Security Council the primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security in accordance with Articles 12 and 24 of the Charter. The Security Council must uphold its mandate to maintain international peace and security and must act in consonance without making the question of Palestine an exception to international law and to the authority of the Security Council. Therefore, NAM calls on the Security Council to justly resolve the Palestinian question and bring an end to this protracted conflict and tragic injustice. The just and peaceful resolution to the question of Palestine is central for establishing durable peace and stability in the Middle East and is a matter of grave concern for the maintenance of international peace and security. The Non-Aligned Movement reiterates the demand for an immediate and permanent ceasefire in Gaza and expresses support for all the ongoing diplomatic efforts, especially by Egypt and Qatar, to reach an agreement for an immediate and permanent ceasefire. NAM condemns negative efforts by Israel that undermine peace and security in the Middle East and accordingly calls for the cessation of military campaign in Gaza, the release and exchange of hostages and the Palestinian detainees detained in Israeli prisons, the return of Palestinian civilians to their homes and neighborhoods in all areas of Gaza, and the safe and effective distribution of sufficient humanitarian assistance throughout the Gaza Strip to all Palestinian refugees, civilians who need it, including medical needs. NAM rejects any attempts to use humanitarian assistance, particularly food, as a weapon of warfare. In this context, the Non-Aligned Movement expresses its support to the Arab Islamic Plan for Early Recovery, Reconstruction and Development of Gaza, which was presented by the Arab Republic of Egypt in full coordination with the State of Palestine and endorsed by both the Arab League and the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. Now, member states express concern at reports of forced displacement of the Palestinian population in Gaza, as it represents a clear disregard for the Palestinian people's inalienable right to their homeland and self-determination, and attempts by occupying power to alter the legal, physical, and demographic status of Palestinian territories is illegal and inconsistent with international law. NAM recalls Security Council Resolution 233 of 2016, which provides for a viable path to peace, setting forth the essential requirements and parameters for the realization of a just outcome on the basis of the two-state solution based on June 4th, 1967 lines, and ensuring the fulfillment of the Palestinian people of their inalienable rights, including to self-determination and the independence of the state of Palestine, with East Jerusalem as its capital, and a just solution for the plight of the Palestinian refugees in accordance with General Assembly Resolution A/RES/1943. NAM strongly calls for full respect for and the implementation of provisions of Resolution 2334 of 2016 and all other relevant resolutions regarding the complete cessation of all Israeli settlement activities and the status of the occupied East Jerusalem. In this regard, NAM calls for the respect of the historic status quo of the holy sites in Jerusalem. NAM expresses grave concern about the deteriorating situation on the ground, which has been marked by an escalation of Israeli settlement activities in grave breach of international law and rising violence, provocation, and incitement, particularly settler violence, that has led to the tragic loss of life to civilians, including children, and the detention of thousands of Palestinian refugees and countless other human rights abuses and violations of international law. NAM calls for the admission of the State of Palestine as a full member state of the United Nations with all rights and privileges. The Security Council must act in this regard. We call on all countries that have not recognized the State of Palestine to do so forthwith as an expression of their sincere commitment to peace and their respect for international law and legality in accordance with the relevant United Nations resolution. Now, member states once again reiterate their call for the continued provision of the needed humanitarian and socio-economic assistance to the Palestinian people, including Palestinian refugees. The movement reaffirmed the continued indispensability of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Refugees, for Palestinian refugees in the Near East, UNRWA, along with other United Nations agencies and international organizations in alleviating their plight, and urges the international community to support the agency with sufficient and predictable funding without blocking its humanitarian work. NAM rejects any attempts by Israel to sideline UNRWA as this poses a threat to its humanitarian role in accordance with its General Assembly mandate. To conclude, NAM rejects all attempts to deny the Palestinian people's rights to self-determination, to obstruct the recognition of Palestine as an independent state, sovereign state, and to hinder its attainment of full membership in the United Nations. Now, member states call for urgent protection and preservation of the Palestinian territories and civilian population and reiterate the long-standing call for the complete cessation of all Israeli settlement activities in the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem, and the halt to all attempts to forcibly displace Palestinian civilians, seize or annex Palestinian territory, including the Gaza Strip. The movement reiterates its call for collective international efforts to uphold international law, to bring an end to this historic and grave injustice against the Palestinian people. Now, member states reaffirm their commitment to promoting a just, lasting, comprehensive, and peaceful solution to the question of Palestine in all its aspects, including for the plight of the Palestinian people, and reaffirm their support for the Palestinian people in their struggle to achieve justice and fulfill their inalienable rights and legitimate national aspirations, including to self-determination, freedom, and independence in their sovereign and independent state of Palestine, with East Jerusalem as its capital. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Uganda on behalf of the non-aligned movement, and now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Barbados on behalf of the Caribbean community.
Distinguished co-chairs, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I have the honor to make this statement on behalf of the 14 member states of the Caribbean Community, CARICOM. CARICOM welcomes the convening of this important conference. We express our appreciation to the governments of France and Saudi Arabia for their leadership in this regard. We also commend the work of the co-chairs of the working groups. Excellencies, at their meeting only 2 weeks ago, CARICOM heads of government discussed the situation in the Middle East in general and the tragic events taking place in Gaza in particular. First, CARICOM heads reaffirmed the region's unwavering commitment to a two-state solution as the only viable path to a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace between Israelis and Palestinians, consistent with UN resolutions and international law. They lamented the belligerent and continued disregard for these resolutions, urging the international community to redouble efforts for strict adherence and enforcement. CARICOM's commitment to a two-state solution is underlined by the fact that all 14 CARICOM member states recognize Israel and all 14 CARICOM member states recognize Palestine. Second, CARICOM heads reiterated their clear and long-standing position on the situation in Gaza, expressing profound distress about the ongoing suffering being inflicted on the Palestinian people, the tragic loss of civilian lives, particularly those of women and children. CARICOM heads also reiterated their unequivocal condemnation of all violence against civilians, including the abhorrent attacks of 7th October 2023 and the hostage-taking. Equally, they condemned the relentless and disproportionate military operations, including indiscriminate bombardment and direct attacks on aid-seeking civilians, as flagrant violations of international humanitarian law. They also condemned the systematic undermining of peace by illegal settlement and the unacceptable dismantling of humanitarian mechanisms which have created a crisis of unparalleled proportions. Third, CARICOM heads also reiterated their call for an immediate, unconditional, and sustained ceasefire and unimpeded humanitarian access, noting that these calls have repeatedly gone unheeded. CARICOM further demands an end to the forced displacement of Palestinians and protection of civilians in accordance with international humanitarian law, underscoring the imperative of accountability for all violations, with perpetrators brought to justice. Fourth and finally, co-chairs, excellencies, all 14 countries of the Caribbean community stand ready to support all constructive initiatives for a lasting peace that meets the legitimate aspirations for security, dignity, and stability of all Israelis, of all Palestinians, and of all peoples in the wider Middle East. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Barbados, who spoke on behalf of the Caribbean community. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Mexico.
Señores
Co-chairs, distinguished colleagues, Mexico welcomes the holding of this conference under the leadership of France and Saudi Arabia. My country, together with Canada and Qatar, co-chaired the Roundtable on Narratives for Peace, in line with our profound humanist conviction. Peace should be achieved through dialogue and absolute respect for international law and human rights. The international community could not stand aside from what was happening in the Middle East. In Gaza and other areas of the Palestinian territory this afternoon, while we are holding our discussions, men and women, children and the elderly are dying, are being displaced, or are suffering the consequences of famine. We had to act. The historic position of Mexico on this conflict has been rooted in the two-state solution, one Israeli and the other Palestinian. We have expressed this over decades, and we remain convinced that this is the only way to achieve a sustainable peace. We are facing an unacceptable reality. The long-lasting Israeli-Palestinian conflict must be resolved. The United Nations has a moral and political imperative to promote solutions that allow for a future of peaceful coexistence for the region. This is particularly the case because the UN was involved since the very gestation of the issue. The suffering being suffered by the Palestinians, the atrocious number of Israelis that were murdered, and the suffering that's been faced by innocent civilians, as well as the forced displacement, are all unacceptable for local populations and for the international community. We cannot dehumanize the figures of victims, nor can we stand indifferent to them. We have condemned the atrocious attacks by Hamas of the 7th of October 2023. But no crime justifies the commission of another crime. Mexico expresses its deep-rooted dismay at the starvation alert in Gaza. We reiterate our condemnation of the use of hunger as a weapon of war. Such an action is not only contrary to international law, it destroys any ethical principle and nullifies human dignity. We maintain our support for the work of UNRWA, and at the same time we regret the policies that suggest the establishment of the so-called closed humanitarian city and new settlements in occupied Palestinian territory. These plans only further the confinement of the Palestinian population and protract its suffering. In order to guarantee the two-state solution, it is essential to ensure a permanent, unconditional, and immediate ceasefire, the also immediate and unconditional release of hostages, and the lifting of restrictions on humanitarian assistance in Gaza. Let us not lose sight of the fact that Israeli security also must be guaranteed in such a way as would correspond to the Palestinian state. Mexico proposes that education curricula, both of Israel and Palestine, should teach the commonalities between both cultures. Furthermore, we supported the efforts for joint cooperation between Palestinians and Israelis. The best example of this is the West Eastern Divan Orchestra, which was founded by Daniel Barenboim and Edward Said, comprising young professionals from Palestine and Israel. In order to ensure justice in light of the reality, the UN must reconsider the admission of the State of Palestine as a fully fledged member state of this organization. Mexico is convinced that this conference can contribute to laying the foundations for a peace plan supported and guided by the UN. The declaration from this conference, which is also supported by my country, must be a commitment to moving towards the end of the occupation subsequent to 1967 and to realizing the two-state solution based on international law and United Nations resolutions. It is time to make history. Thank you very much.
I thank the distinguished representative of Mexico. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Belgium.
Co-chairs, Excellencies, first of all, I would like to thank France and Saudi Arabia for their tremendous effort and leadership for organizing this important conference. Almost to the day, 80 years ago, the UN Charter was signed as a commitment to prevent future global conflicts and to foster international cooperation. As a UN member state, we must all honor these commitments. Therefore, I stand before you today not only as a representative of Belgium, but as a voice for peace, justice, and the respect of international law and human rights. The people of Palestine have waited far too long for what is their inalienable right, the right to self-determination, the right to live in freedom and dignity, and the right to a democratic state of their own. Belgium reaffirms its unwavering support for the two-state solution, a solution that envisions Israel and Palestine living side by side in peace and security within mutually agreed and internationally recognized borders based on the 1967 lines with respectful arrangements for access to all holy sites and Jerusalem as a capital of both states. This is not a radical idea. It is the consensus of the international community, enshrined in countless UN resolutions and supported by the vast majority of nations represented in this chamber, even by those who are not present now. Belgium will continue working actively with its international and European partners towards achieving that sustainable solution. We believe that the two-state solution is the most concrete way to ensure the fundamental rights, security, and dignity of both the Israeli and Palestinian people. Moreover, Belgium will continue to provide bilateral funding and technical assistance to the Palestinians, including through UNRWA. We will also continue to support the Palestinian Authority and its efforts to strengthen its institutional capacity and democratic legitimacy, and we stand ready to expand our support for the Palestinian Authority's return to govern the Gaza Strip. We continue to condemn the brutal terrorist attacks of October 7th, and we recognize the suffering endured by civilians on both sides of the Green Line. We condemn all acts of violence, terrorism, hostage-taking, and the targeting of innocent lives. We also acknowledge that the disrespect for international law, that occupation, displacement, the expansion of settlements, and the current blockade on Gaza are not conditions for peace. They are obstacles to it. We must not look away from the scale of the suffering. The reported violations of human rights cannot be normalized. They must stop. What is urgently needed is an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, in line with UN Security Council resolutions 2735 and 1701. Belgium calls on Israel to immediately allow, as a bare minimum, the full resumption of aid into Gaza and enable the UN and recognize humanitarian organizations to work independently, professionally, and impartially to save lives, end starvation, and maintain dignity. We all have a moral duty to help improve the humanitarian situation on the ground, and the international community can rely on Belgium's support and expertise to take meaningful action to address the acute needs in Gaza. We also reiterate reiterate our firm message that Hamas must immediately release all remaining hostages and allow humanitarian assistance to be distributed without interference. Let us recall that the terrorist organization Hamas must be disarmed and must withdraw from the governments in Gaza. To our Israeli friends, recognizing the rights of Palestinians to an independent state is the only guarantee of lasting peace and security. A just peace will not diminish Israel, it will strengthen it. To our Palestinian friends, your future must not be one of endless waiting, but of hope, sovereignty, and peace. Let us be clear, the two-state solution is not dead. It is bruised, yes, but it can be revived, and it must be, for the sake of both peoples and for the sake of our shared humanity. The night is the darkest before dawn, therefore, we call on all parties to return to the negotiating table. At a time when the world needs de-escalation and solutions, we must not abandon the path of dialogue. Let history remember this moment, not as another missed opportunity, but as a turning point for peace. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Belgium. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Nicaragua.
Señores y señoras copresidentes.
Co-chairs. Nicaragua aligns itself with the statements delivered by Uganda on behalf of the non-aligned movement, by Iraq on behalf of the Group of 77 and China, and by Venezuela on behalf of the Group of Friends in Defense of the Charter of the United Nations. We are grateful for the convening of this international conference. We trust that it will bring concrete and credible steps to remedying a historical injustice, a tragedy caused by this very organization, a permanent catastrophe and suffering that has spanned over 7 decades. The entire world has witnessed and continues to witness the atrocities committed by Israel, including war crimes, crimes against humanity, and violations of the principles and purposes of the UN Charter, international law, international humanitarian law, and the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. Silence in the face of such aberrations is a form of complicity, but not the only one. This Assembly has the historic responsibility to call things by their name. What more do we need to see to acknowledge that war crimes, crimes against humanity, and acts constituting genocide are being committed in Palestine? Today, Gaza is a devastated land. More than 70% of homes have been destroyed. Thousands of children have been murdered. Hospitals and schools have been bombed. There is an entire population under siege, no water or shelter. In addition to all of this, Gaza is facing the greatest orphan crisis in modern history. According to the Palestinian Central Bureau of Statistics, more than 40,000 children have been orphaned. Of these, 17,000 little children have lost both parents, torn from their arms in an instant. But the horror doesn't stop there. The Gazan Ministry of Health has revealed another dimension of this tragedy. Around 900,000 children are suffering from hunger, and 70,000 have officially entered severe malnutrition. These are children who have lost their protectors and are now struggling to survive without the most basic necessities. This is the stark reality, the double burden on Gaza's children: mass orphanhood and extreme starvation. Chair, it's important to clarify that there are not two sides. There is an occupied people and an occupier. There is a civilian population under siege and an occupying army that bombs and kills with absolute impunity. Stability, peace, and international security in the Middle East will remain a utopia for as long as Palestine continues to be denied and its inalienable rights ignored. The United States and European governments must end their financing of this genocide. The only thing that they do by increasing their economic, political, and military support and supplying more weapons to Israel is enabling the continued extermination of the Palestinian people. Chair, Nicaragua has consistently maintained its position, reiterating that one of the first steps towards ensuring effective, concrete outcomes of this important conference is the recognition of the State of Palestine and its admission as a fully fledged member of the UN. Recognizing the State of Palestine is a contribution to peace, a moral and legal obligation. It's the right path towards a permanent political solution that is needed to end the genocide against the Palestinian people. In Latin America and the Caribbean, which is a zone of peace, 32 states have already fully recognized the State of Palestine. Only one state in our region still has yet to do so. Supporting the two-state solution while recognizing only one of these and ignoring the recognition of the other, no matter how eloquent the words or good the intentions, and there are many eloquent words, is insufficient. It perpetuates a farce that legitimizes the occupation. Such a narrative is politically inconsistent, since it's not impartial. It only favors the recognized state and continues to deny the existence and realization of the State of Palestine. The United States should no longer deny the rightful admission of the State of Palestine as a full member of the UN. This policy of denial has no place in the aspirations and consensus of more than 2/3 of this organization's membership, which officially supports and recognizes the State of Palestine. 149 states at the UN recognize the State of Palestine. It's now time for Western countries to bring an end to their policies of denial towards the Palestinian people. If they do not do so, they will be accomplices in the crimes of Zionism and the impunity fueling this genocide, where now not only bullets and bombs are used to kill, but hunger is also wielded to try to annihilate the unbreakable will of Palestinian freedom. The right of the State of Palestine must be recognized without any preconditions or conditionalities. The right to self-determination is sacred and is fundamental to the UN Charter. The Palestinian people must be able to exercise its right to self-determination without being subjected to any coercive measures. That sovereign right belongs solely to the Palestinian people. Recognizing the State of Palestine is an act of peace. It is a necessary step to correct this historical injustice that has lasted 80 years. Future generations, when looking back over history, will rightly ask how and why was this genocide and such barbarity against the Palestinian people allowed to happen. Chair, Nicaragua hopes that this conference will also result in concrete steps alleviating the suffering of the population of the State of Palestine and the Gaza Strip, and will bring a complete end to Israel's illegally recognized occupation of all the OPT. Humanitarian assistance, far from being an optional gesture, is an obligation under international law. Israel must allow immediately unrestricted, continuous and unconditional access for humanitarian aid, ensuring the flow of food, water, medicines and medical equipment without political obstacles or arbitrary conditions. We condemn the politicization and use of humanitarian aid as a weapon of war. The international community has the responsibility to act decisively, harnessing all available mechanisms, including legal ones, to ensure the safe passage of aid. The International Court of Justice has determined that the Israeli occupation is illegal. All states are obliged not to recognize or support that situation. Those doing so become accomplices to an international crime. Chair, enough with impunity. We must apply international law as concrete measures to hold Israel accountable for its crimes. Nicaragua has joined the commitment to adopt 6 coordinated diplomatic, legal and economic measures to halt Israel's assault on the OPT and to defend international law more broadly. Nicaragua does not recognize as legitimate the situation created by Israel's illegal action, as confirmed by the ICJ in its advisory opinions of 2004 and 2024. Nicaragua provides no political, economic, military, or other support to the State of Israel. Nicaragua has no form of commercial relations or economic activity involving the occupied Palestinian territory or products made, manufactured, or produced by Israel. Chair, the Government of Reconciliation and National Unity of Nicaragua and the Nicaraguan people have always supported the just cause of the Palestinian people. It's a matter of principle, of solidarity among brothers and sisters in struggle. We reaffirm our unconditional support for the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people, their right to return, and their right to a free and sovereign Palestinian state in accordance with the 1967 borders and with East Jerusalem as their capital. Chairs, because Palestine lives, Palestine resists, and because Palestine shall prevail, Nicaragua, firm in its internationalist solidarity, will continue to raise its voice in all forums until the flag of Palestine flies free and sovereign over its ancestral land. Thank you very much.
I thank the distinguished representative of Nicaragua. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Liechtenstein.
Co-chairs, Liechtenstein commends France and Saudi Arabia for convening this important conference in accordance with General Assembly Resolution 79/81. It is more important than ever for the international community to send a signal of faith in and support of the two-state solution as a prerequisite for peace for Israelis and Palestinians. Co-chairs, our failure to find a political solution to this conflict prolongs the immense suffering of the civilian population with every passing day. In Gaza, every civilian faces the threat of famine, a direct result of the obstruction of aid and basic services, which constitute violations of international law. Liechtenstein strongly condemns intentionally using starvation of civilians as a method of warfare and urges Israel both to allow the full resumption of aid into Gaza immediately and to ensure swift and unhindered access to the UN and other humanitarian organizations, in accordance with its obligations under international law and international criminal law. We also reiterate our call for an immediate, unconditional, and permanent ceasefire, along with the release of all hostages. In the West Bank, settlements have been built at an increasing pace, in violation of Security Council Resolution 2334. Resolutions adopted by the General Assembly are ignored, and Security Council resolutions regarding all parts of the occupied Palestinian territory are routinely violated. Indeed, the International Court of Justice last year reiterated that Israeli policies and practices in East Jerusalem and the West Bank amount to annexation. Co-chairs, Liechtenstein hopes that the adoption of General Assembly Resolution ES 10/27 last month will once again provide an impetus to address the immediate and dire situation and calls for its urgent implementation. As we said at the convening of the emergency special session, the situation clearly demonstrates the maxim: there cannot be a military solution, but only a political one. Liechtenstein reaffirms the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination and its strong support for the two-state solution, with the State of Israel and the State of Palestine living side by side in peace and security and mutual recognition, as the only way to bring a peaceful, stable, and sustainable solution to the ongoing conflict. Liechtenstein has for many years been of the view that the State of Palestine fulfills the criteria of statehood under international law. In this respect, let us remind all actors, including those looking to effect demographic change, the two-state solution is not up for debate. Attempts to change this reality by force are in opposition to the purposes and principles of this organization and the expressed will of its membership. Co-chairs, going forward, Liechtenstein calls on all actors to adhere to and implement all relevant resolutions of the General Assembly and the Security Council, starting with Resolution 181 that made clear the commitment of the membership to the two-state solution. We will continue to work with all states on the basis of our shared commitment to protect civilians and uphold international law to ensure that the Palestinian people are able to live in a secure, peaceful, and dignified manner, side by side with the State of Israel as two states with equal rights. This is the promise that we have collectively made and must work to keep. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Liechtenstein, and I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Algeria.
Co-chairs, we commend Saudi Arabia and France for leading the efforts toward the organization of this high-level conference. We meet today to discuss the two-state solution. To some, this may seem futile, even surreal. How can one speak of statehood while Gaza is destroyed, while Gaza is burning, while Gaza is starving? How can one speak of statehood while the West Bank is bleeding? Yet, it is precisely in times of darkness that principles must be affirmed and reaffirmed. Coming from its own history, Algeria believes that the right response to oppression, the right response to occupation is not surrender, but steadfastness. Not despair, but determination. Not silence, but resolve. The Palestinian people have a legal and natural right, a right rooted in history, in law, in justice, the right to self-determination, the right to an independent, sovereign state of Palestine, with Al-Quds al-Sharif as its capital. Co-chair, Algiers, the capital of my country, witnessed in 1988 the declaration of the establishment of the State of Palestine. Today, we again and again call for action, not rhetoric, and we propose 3 clear steps. First, the two-state solution must be fortified. This begins with granting the State of Palestine full membership in the United Nations. Algeria was the first, and so far, the only country making officially that call to the Security Council last January, a call supported by the overwhelmingly majority of the members of the Security Council. And we stand ready to do it again. Second, recognition must answer denial. Algeria was the first country to recognize the state of Palestine 37 years ago. And we now call upon all nations that have yet to do so, catch up with history. Third, the Palestinians must be empowered on their land. Displacement must be rejected. Land must be protected. Settlements must be criminalized. Impunity must end. But before all this, before all else, there must be a ceasefire in Gaza. Now, not temporary, not conditional, an immediate and conditional and permanent ceasefire. Aid must flow, not trickle. Children must eat, not starve. Co-chair, in conclusion, allow me to recall the words of President Abdelmajid Tebboune. Algeria is with Palestine, and we shall not waver. We shall not abandon the just cause of the Palestinian people until they obtain their full and undiminished rights. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Algeria. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of India.
Distinguished co-chairs and excellencies. At the outset, I would like to thank the co-chairs France and Saudi Arabia for their leadership in convening this high-level conference. I also commend the efforts of the chairs of the 8 working groups for their valuable contributions in outlining the broad contours and action points related to various aspects of the two-state solution. The stated intent of the international community as expressed at the United Nations since 1947 has consistently been the establishment of 2 states, Israel and Palestine, living side by side in peace and security. In 1974, the question of Palestine was reintroduced in the General Assembly's agenda, and since then, it has reaffirmed the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people to self-determination, national independence, and sovereignty. Deliberations during the preparation for the conference confirmed that the international community continues to believe that there is no substitute for a 2-state solution. In 1988, India became one of the first countries to recognize the state of Palestine with firm support and commitment to the 2-state solution. I'm pleased to underscore that India led by example in this regard more than 37 years ago. The conference offers an opportunity to reflect on the path traversed thus far in the journey towards achieving peace through a 2-state solution. Our efforts must now focus on how to bring about a 2-state solution through purposeful dialogue and diplomacy and bringing the parties to the conflict to engage directly with each other. Reaffirmation of support must take the form of actionable steps that pave the way for the 2-state solution. Identification of such steps and their implementation modalities demand our collective attention and effort. Friends, let us be clear on some basic prerequisites. First, the humanitarian assistance pillar demands our immediate attention and action. The human suffering in Gaza continues unabated. Tens of thousands have been killed and many more injured. Several medical facilities have been damaged or destroyed. Children have been deprived of schooling for more than 20 months. humanitarian aid needs to flow without impediments. Second, let us also not forget the plight of the hostages and their families. There can be no justification whatsoever for terrorism, for addressing any root cause or political grievance. Third, Palestinians in Gaza must have access to food, fuel, and other basic necessities without hindrance. Humanitarian assistance is vital in sustaining life and must remain outside the realm of politics or conflict. Fourth, civilians, including women and children, have the right to lead normal lives. In the years ahead, meticulous reconstruction and rehabilitation efforts of a substantially large scale will be required. To this end, India takes note of the plan endorsed by the leaders of the Arab states. We stand ready to do our share in this important task. Distinguished co-chairs, economic prospects and viability for a Palestinian state are crucial. While aid and support are essential for the Palestinian people in rebuilding their lives, it's equally important to create hope and economic structures conducive for investment and employment. India has been making concerted efforts to bring about a tangible impact on the daily lives of the Palestinian people by implementing human-centric projects in diverse sectors. The total commitment by India on this front stands at around $160 million. In doing so, we have also partnered with the Palestinian Authority and the United Nations. Another vital aspect is security. A stable arrangement that suitably caters to the security needs of both sides is necessary. Neither party should feel insecure. A sovereign, viable, and independent state of Palestine within recognized and mutually agreed borders, living side by side with Israel in peace and security, is a prerequisite for enduring peace and sustainable development. India has been clear on the measures that must be undertaken in the short term: an immediate ceasefire, sustained and unimpeded humanitarian assistance, a release of all hostages, and the path of dialogue and diplomacy. There are no alternatives to these measures. We appreciate the efforts of all friendly states that have facilitated such measures between the parties. Co-chairs, the overall sentiment in this forum is clear. It is also India's earnest desire to see peace and calm prevail in the Middle East. Lasting solutions are required to achieve this. Certain action points are emerging from the conference. Following up on them is the key. Let us not be content with paper solutions, but strive to achieve practical solutions that actually make a tangible difference in the daily lives of our Palestinian brothers and sisters. India expresses its complete readiness to contribute to this noble endeavor. I thank you, co-chairs.
I thank the distinguished representative of India. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Zimbabwe.
Co-chairs, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, Zimbabwe expresses its deep appreciation to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the French Republic for their leadership in convening this high-level conference. This initiative provides us with an opportunity to reaffirm our collective commitment to a just, lasting, and comprehensive resolution to the question of Palestine, one that is grounded in the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people, international law, and the principles enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations. Co-chairs, we are meeting at a time when the Palestinian people are enduring one of the gravest chapters of displacement, devastation, and despair in living memory. The relentless bombardment and military operations by Israel have wrought unspeakable suffering in Gaza and the broader occupied Palestinian territories, tearing apart families, silencing the laughter of children, and laying waste the foundations of hope. As the innocent perish and the cries of the afflicted rise in anguish, we must pause and search our conscience. Where is our humanity? Where is the compassion that should stir every heart? Zimbabwe joins the moral conscience of the world in condemning these acts as egregious violations of international humanitarian and human rights law. We call with urgency and resolve for an immediate and unconditional ceasefire, the cessation of all hostilities, and the unfettered delivery of life-saving humanitarian aid. Let us not turn away in indifference, but respond with the justice, mercy, and courage that our shared humanity demands of us. Co-chairs, Zimbabwe holds that sustainable peace and security for both Palestinians and Israelis can only be achieved through the full realization of the two-state solution based on the pre-1967 borders and with East Jerusalem as the capital of Palestine. Only through dismantling the occupation and restoration of Palestinian sovereignty can we address the root causes of the insecurity and foster mutual recognition and legal parity. The preservation of the two-state solution must move beyond rhetoric to tangible and enforceable action, and immediate priorities must include: 1, the end of the blockade on Gaza; 2nd, a cessation of illegal settlements, activities, and forced evictions; 3rd, the restoration of Palestinian civil infrastructure and economic viability; 4th, the protection of civilians and accountability for violations. In addition, the economic revitalization of the occupied Palestinian territory, including lifting restrictions on movement, rebuilding essential infrastructure, and enabling trade and investment, is foundational. Political solutions will remain fragile unless anchored in economic sovereignty. Zimbabwe supports enhanced technical and logistical support to Palestinian Authority security institutions. We also underscore the importance of confidence-building measures such as the release of hostages, of detainees, and robust international monitoring mechanisms. Security guarantees in peace talks must be equitable and rooted in justice, and must not entrench the occupation under any guise of protection. A just resolution of the refugee question, consistent with the United Nations General Assembly Resolution 194, also remains essential to the broader architecture of peace. In this regard, Zimbabwe supports the exploration of a United Nations mandated stabilization or protection mission with a clearly defined mandate. Its priorities should include civilian protection, monitoring of ceasefires, support of Palestinian security forces, oversight of demilitarized zones as mutually agreed. Co-chairs, we welcome the establishment of the Global Alliance for the implementation of the two-state solution and commend the inclusive structure of this conference. The envisaged outcome document must articulate unequivocally the urgency of ending occupation, restoring Palestinian sovereignty, and ensuring lasting peace and security for all. In conclusion, Zimbabwe reiterates its unwavering solidarity with the Palestinian people. We reaffirm our support for a viable, independent state of Palestine with East Jerusalem as its capital, coexisting in peace and security with the State of Israel, in line with the relevant UN resolutions and international law. Let us summon the collective resolve to translate our shared commitments as expressed at this conference into concrete action. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Zimbabwe. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Peru.
Señor Presidente.
Mr. Chairman, allow me to begin my statement by thanking the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, France, and the Secretary General of the United Nations for convening this important conference, the aim of which is to address the sensitive situation of the Palestinian population and the implementation of a two-state solution grounded in international law and in security guarantees, enabling the parties to harmonize their positions as a demonstration of a genuine commitment to peace. The heightening tensions, systematic violence, and the ongoing deterioration of the humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank are of increasing concern to the international community. These are concerns that Peru deeply shares. The government of Peru reiterates here its profound concern over the worsening of this situation since the 7th of October 2023, the date which saw the deplorable terrorist attacks by Hamas against Israel. Peru, as a country that has itself suffered cruel acts of terrorism in the past, unequivocally rejects terrorism in all its forms and manifestations, irrespective of the perpetrator or the origin. Nevertheless, we cannot fail to acknowledge and deeply regret the inhumane suffering of millions of displaced Palestinians amidst imminent famine and the unacceptable and systematic obstruction of the entry of humanitarian aid, all of which is a clear violation of international humanitarian law. The attacks in Gaza, which the Israeli Defense Forces claim are directed against the terrorist organization Hamas, have, according to the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, been carried out without due regard for the principles of distinction, proportionality, and precaution. All of this, by the 25th of July, had resulted in at least 59,219 Palestinian fatalities, most of whom are women and children, and more than 143,000 wounded, according to figures published by the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. In this unpredictable context, the only thing that isn't letting up is violence. In such a context, it is essential to take decisive steps to de-escalate the current situation and to relaunch the peace process that is being promoted by Egypt, Qatar, and the United States of America, whose mediation efforts are aimed at restoring the implementation of the ceasefire agreement in its subsequent phases. In this regard, Peru joins the Secretary General's call for the parties to declare an immediate ceasefire, the immediate release of all hostages, and the removal of any obstacles preventing the entry of humanitarian aid under United Nations administration. All of this, of course, in line with the resolutions of the Security Council, the General Assembly, and the provisional measures ordered by the International Court of Justice, to bring an end to the suffering of a population which today is particularly vulnerable, is suffering displacement, and lacks the basic conditions for their survival. We support the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination, and we reject any measure that entails their forced displacement, as well as the use of starvation of civilians in need as a method of war. It is essential that the humanitarian work of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees in the Near East continue. This is particularly the case now, given the current circumstances. We also express our concern over the deaths of more than 300 UNRWA humanitarian workers in the Gaza Strip since the onset of the conflict, including United Nations personnel, who continue to suffer from this. Their protection, in accordance with international law and international humanitarian law, is a binding obligation for all parties. The lack of a solution to this grave humanitarian crisis calls into question the principles, values, and objectives of our organization. Hence, all efforts aimed at persuading the parties to demonstrate flexibility and to address their differences in a tolerant and transparent manner, seeking common ground through a peaceful approach, are indispensable and are urgent. Indeed, these efforts must receive the support of the international community as a whole. Chair, I conclude by expressing Peru's commitment to the pursuit of peace and to its principles-based position on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The government of Peru, led by the President Dina Boluarte, reiterates its support for initiatives aimed at achieving a long-term political solution based on the existence of two states, Palestine and Israel. Two states coexisting peacefully within recognized, secure, and mutually agreed borders. All of this in accordance with international law, relevant United Nations resolutions, and the purposes and principles enshrined in the United Nations Charter. Peru is a country with a long-held tradition of compliance with international law. For this reason, we support the peaceful settlement of disputes. We will continue to be a staunch advocate of multilateralism, preventive diplomacy, and respect for human dignity. Thank you very much.
I thank the distinguished representative of Peru. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Uruguay.
Muy buenas tardes.
Very good afternoon. Co-chairs, distinguished representatives. For Uruguay, this conference represents an urgent opportunity to bring an end to the deep-rooted humanitarian crisis being suffered in Gaza and to forge towards a lasting peace between Israel and Palestine based on international law. The two-state solution is the cornerstone of our country's historic position on the question of the Middle East, a solution that we have supported since the United Nations first began addressing this issue. In 1947, Uruguay's then permanent representative to the United Nations, Ambassador Enrique Rodriguez Fabregat, played a significant role in the partition plan. Uruguay then voted in favor of General Assembly Resolution 181 and was one of the first countries to recognize the State of Israel and to establish diplomatic relations in 1948. Montevideo then became the first Latin American capital to host an Israeli embassy. To ensure that we remain consistent with this position, and because we believe that recognition of the State of Palestine is a necessary precondition for peace, not a consequence of it, in 2011 we took a significant step recognizing Palestine as a state. Since then, Uruguay has maintained an embassy in Ramallah, and the State of Palestine has an embassy in Montevideo. Today, Uruguay comes to this important conference to more than ever reaffirm our commitment to the two-state solution based on the 1967 borders. This is the only truly viable solution, since it respects the principle of people's right to self-determination and also offers this prospect of lasting peace in the region where Israelis and Palestinians could live together in peace and security. Uruguay is a state and a nation whose foreign policy is firmly rooted in respect for international law. When violations of international law and international humanitarian law are as clear as those that we see currently mainly in Gaza but also in the West Bank, condemning such acts becomes both a matter of ensuring basic consistency with our foreign policy and also a moral imperative. For this reason, the government of Uruguay has condemned the attacks by Israeli forces on the Palestinian civilian population, including the recent attacks on individuals approaching humanitarian aid distribution centers designated by Israel in Gaza. And it has urgently called on the government of Israel to guarantee the free, safe and unfettered access for humanitarian aid through the United Nations in accordance with the principles of international humanitarian law. Since October 2023, more than 56,000 Palestinians have died, most of them women and children, and 1 in 4 Gazans is facing a critical risk of famine, according to the WHO. The expansion of Israeli settlements in the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem, represents a flagrant violation of international law and one of the greatest obstacles to the two-state solution and to achieving a just and lasting peace. Therefore, Uruguay has called for an end to all settlement building activity. Similarly, we reject any action that promotes territorial or demographic changes in the occupied Palestinian territory. In this regard, Uruguay reaffirms its support for the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice of July 2024 on the legal consequences of Israel's occupation of Palestinian territories. This opinion determined that the occupation was unlawful and that Israel must end its presence in the occupied territories. Co-chairs, Uruguay welcomes the recent decisions taken by various member states to recognize Palestine as a state. This international recognition contributes to the pursuit of peace between both states based on international law. It will further serve as momentum for Palestine's admission as a full member of this organization. Uruguay will continue to demand compliance with international law, human rights, and international humanitarian law in Palestine and in Israel. It is essential to resume, and we support, diplomatic efforts aimed at achieving an immediate and permanent ceasefire, the undelayed delivery of humanitarian aid in accordance with the principles of international humanitarian law, and the immediate release of all hostages. With renewed belief in international law, diplomacy and peace, Uruguay reaffirms its firm and unwavering commitment to the two-state solution and to the right of all peoples to live in security, freedom and dignity. Thank you very much.
I thank the distinguished representative of Uruguay, and I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Seychelles.
Co-chairs, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, Seychelles extends its sincere appreciation to France and Saudi Arabia for their leadership as co-chairs during this pivotal moment, when the vision of a two-state solution feels more distant than ever. We also commend the co-facilitators' consultative approach and their essential work in guiding us toward solutions on the Palestine issue. We gather here today not just to exchange statements, but to collectively reaffirm our responsibility. The need for principled action by this body and by the broader international community is greater than ever. We must ensure that a just and sustained outcome for Palestine remains within reach, and that our collective efforts are not merely rhetorical, but grounded in implementation. The paralysis of the Security Council and rising unilateral actions have deepened the crisis. At this juncture, it is critical that the voices of all member states be heard. If there is to be true consensus on peace, it must be broad, inclusive, and unwavering in its commitment to international law. At a time when countless lives have been lost and an entire population continues to live under the weight of conflict, the urgency of global action cannot be overstated. The two-state solution, with Israel and Palestine living side by side in peace and security, remains the internationally recognized framework for resolution. It is rooted in key UNSC resolutions, including 242, 338, 1397, and 2334, and supported by decades of international consensus. Yet, the situation on the ground continues to deteriorate. The violence against civilians, the devastation in Gaza, and the absence of any possible political horizon have made the path to peace appear increasingly elusive. The status quo is not only untenable, it is dangerous. It fosters despair, radicalization, and deepens distrust. The United Nations must respond with renewed clarity and determination. It must continue to uphold the legal foundations of the two-state solution and strengthen the support for Palestinian institution building and economic development, including through agencies such as UNRWA, which remains essential to the well-being of millions of Palestinians. At the same time, the protection of civilians is paramount. Humanitarian assistance must be allowed to flow without obstruction, particularly in Gaza, where the humanitarian situation remains deeply concerning. A permanent ceasefire is urgently needed. The immediate and unconditional release of all hostages must be ensured. These are not merely political objectives, but shared humanitarian responsibilities. The right to life, dignity, and peace must be safeguarded for all. Seychelles reaffirms its unwavering commitment to the peaceful resolution of the question of Palestine, grounded in the principle of equal rights and the self-determination of peoples. The two-state solution must not become a fading aspiration. Seychelles recognized the State of Palestine's declaration of independence in 1988 and welcomes the renewed momentum to fulfill our obligations as an international community. It is the only viable pathway to lasting peace, a sovereign and independent Palestine existing alongside Israel, with both states living in peace and security. If reassurance is what is sought by either side, then let us offer it. The cycle of violence must end. The suffering must end. Humanity must prevail, and the time to act is now. I thank you.
I
thank the distinguished representative of Seychelles and now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Poland.
Distinguished co-chairs, excellencies, the moment has arrived to pursue sincere and renewed efforts toward achieving lasting peace in the Middle East. The situation in the region calls for decisive action, as it can no longer endure repeated cycles of violence, suffering, and humanitarian disaster. Poland's position on the main topic of the conference is clear. We remain firmly committed to the implementation of the two-state solution. It is important to recall that Poland recognized Palestinian statehood back in 1988, more than 35 years ago. We thus thank France and Saudi Arabia for your efforts to enhance global support for the two-state solution. To realize this goal, Poland maintains that Israel's long-term security can only be achieved by the diplomatic engagement with its neighbors. Abraham Accords, facilitated by the United States, serve as the best example to follow. Yet, to enable a diplomatic solution, the Palestinian issue must be addressed. Excellencies, Poland condemns all forms of terrorism, whether state-sponsored or carried out by the non-state actors. Terrorism is no solution to any problems. It only deepens suffering and instability of people, states, and regions. In this context, we fully support Israel's sovereign right to self-defense and persistently call for an unconditional release of Hamas-held Israeli hostages. But we cannot tolerate Israel's policies that result in civilians dying of hunger on the Israeli-occupied Palestinian territories. Poland upholds its position that the limitation of humanitarian aid deliveries to the Gaza Strip, employed by the Israeli authorities as a means of exerting pressure on Hamas, constitutes an unacceptable violation of the principles of international law. We call for immediate, full, and sustained humanitarian access. Poland also sees the necessity of resuming the activities of UNRWA in the occupied territories. We continue to provide financial support to this United Nations agency. Excellencies, a new momentum is emerging, although we are fully aware that achieving a two-state solution is bleak and requires breakthrough efforts. In this context, we are particularly alarmed by the recent Knesset resolution calling on the government to, and I quote, extend Israeli sovereignty over Judea and Samaria and the Jordan Valley, end of quote, which effectively amounts to the annexation of the occupied territories of the West Bank. In conclusion, Excellencies, allow me to underscore that Poland strongly condemns the violation of international law and international humanitarian law, including the Gaza Strip, and we have often taken a public stance on these matters. We call for an immediate restoration of the humanitarian access to Gaza and the reassumption of the food and medical aid convoys. In this spirit, we have recently joined the British initiative, together with 30 like-minded foreign ministers, to address the grave situation on the ground in Gaza. Above all, we express our strong hope for a swift agreement on the ceasefire in the Gaza Strip, one that will also ensure the immediate release of all hostages held by Hamas. Peace, security, and human dignity must prevail, and I thank you.
أشكر الممثل الموقر لبولندا
I thank the distinguished representative of Poland. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Brunei Darussalam.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. A very good afternoon. Co-chairs, Excellencies, distinguished delegates. Brunei Darussalam appreciates Saudi Arabia and France for their leadership to advance a just, comprehensive, and lasting resolution on Palestine. We also appreciate the co-chairs of the working groups for the tireless efforts and work in ensuring substantive outcomes for the conference. It was unfortunate that this conference was postponed at a time when there was momentum towards sustainable peace. Events since then have shown it is more important now than ever to collectively restore that momentum and achieve meaningful progress. Brunei has long advocated for the two-state solution as the only solution for peace in the Middle East. It is the realization of the two states living side by side in peace with one another as good neighbors, based on pre-1967 borders, with East Jerusalem as the capital of an independent and sovereign state of Palestine. This framework, endorsed by the United Nations and supported by the majority of the international community, must be respected, and the path towards ending decades of occupation, territorial expansion, and conflict. Yet why has this not materialized? Certainly not due to lack of intention. There have been about 299 resolutions adopted under the Security Council alone, reflecting clear and consistent commitment grounded firmly in principles of international law and human rights. Failure therefore lies in the lack of action, lack of sincerity in recognizing and accepting the two-state solution, and lack of international will to enforce compliance. The failure to implement obligations under international law and United Nations resolutions perpetuates a cycle of violations leading to untold suffering and violence, and ultimately acts that have increasingly been recognized as amounting to genocide. Those resolutions reflecting the collective will of the international community must be honored to ensure they do not remain mere words on paper. We therefore welcome the initiative by the Hague Group of countries in holding accountable the occupying power for the continued violations. Although Brunei Darussalam is a small state, we are committed to supporting the peace process through various means, whether political, financial, humanitarian, or capacity building for the long-term future and development of Palestine. We welcome efforts to reconstruct Gaza and hope that initiatives such as the recent meeting of the Conference on Cooperation among East Asian Countries for Palestinian Development, CPAD, and the widely supported Arab Plan will materialize into tangible proposals. We also believe that regional organizations have an important role to play in global efforts, and we pledge to work within organizations that we are a member of, such as the OIC and ASEAN, to explore avenues to support and recognition of the two-state solution. Brunei Darussalam reaffirms its unwavering support of and strongly calls for the admission of the State of Palestine as a full United Nations member state. This recognition would demonstrate not only our steadfast commitment to the two-state solution, but also reflect the global consensus towards justice and self-determination. Co-chairs, Excellencies, we stand at a critical juncture. For the eventual realization of two states and towards a future of reconstruction and economic viability, trust is key. However, trust can only be felt if there is commitment. A commitment by all sides to immediately cease the violence and to halt activities which breed the violence. As we enter the 8th decade of the United Nations establishment, we must confront the harsh reality that despite countless resolutions, meaningful progress for Palestine remains elusive and that our work is far from done. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Brunei Darussalam, and now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Cyprus.
Co-chairs, Excellencies, allow me first to thank the co-hosts, France and Saudi Arabia, for reconvening this conference. Your vision and leadership are to be applauded. Cyprus has been actively supporting the coordinated initiative of the Global Alliance from the beginning. This conference today is the pinnacle of intensive preparatory meetings in the last year and action-based results in the respective working groups. Excellencies, our participation is testament to Cyprus's resolve to address the political and humanitarian catastrophe unfolding. Last week, we joined over 2,000 countries in a joint statement underscoring how the suffering of civilians in Gaza has reached new depths and unequivocally opposing any steps towards territorial or demographic change in the occupied Palestinian territories. What is happening on the humanitarian front is unacceptable. We call for immediate, unimpeded access and sustained distribution of humanitarian assistance at scale into and throughout Gaza, and for humanitarian organizations to work independently and impartially to save lives and reduce suffering. The path to peace, stability, and security in the Middle East is the only way forward for a future in which Israelis and Palestinians coexist in dignity and prosperity, side by side in a two-state solution. There is no other alternative. Building also on previous proposals, including the Arab Peace Initiative, to lending a new momentum, every step that reconnects the common denominators to meet the legitimate aspirations and security needs of both Palestinians and Israelis must be encouraged. Let me underscore that Cyprus has recognized the state of Palestine since 1988. We have a long-standing position in line with international law, whilst always trying to act as a bridge for regional stability. This is a fundamental premise from which we have never deviated. Ladies and gentlemen, the October 7th terrorist attacks and the outbreak of the war in Gaza has caused immense human suffering. Prolonging the political deadlock and endangering an unprecedented regional confrontation must be prevented. Our principled stance has been consistent. We condemn all attacks against all civilians who must be always protected in accordance with international humanitarian law. Immediate and sustained regional de-escalation is imperative. The situation on the ground is deteriorating daily. We cannot overemphasize the urgency of a lasting ceasefire. We cannot overemphasize the imperative need for the immediate release of all hostages. To this end, we welcome the critical and sustained efforts by Egypt, Qatar, and the United States to achieve a ceasefire agreement. Equally paramount is for Israel to comply with all its obligations by lifting restrictions to enable the unimpeded flow of humanitarian aid throughout Gaza at scale, in line with the humanitarian principles. We exert our full support to the intensified engagement of the European Union with Israel for yielding substantial progress on the ground for the civilians, for which the role of the UN humanitarian community is indisputable. Cyprus is ready to do its part, complementing the efforts and actions of others in alleviating the suffering. The humanitarian maritime route can be reactivated for additional, urgently needed assistance. We are also unequivocally against displacement. In this regard, we welcome the Arab Recovery and Reconstruction Plan as a solid basis for further discussion on governance, security, and funding. Excellencies, during his visit to Israel and Palestine in early May, President Christodoulidis firmly conveyed these messages. The preceding steps to move away from the horrors of the war must be interlinked with a set of basic political understandings. Let me outline the following points. The legitimate Palestinian cause must not and cannot be associated with terrorist groups or acts. Terrorists can never have an excuse. We believe that Hamas cannot have any future role in Gaza. But at the same time, we must not forget that Hamas is not the Palestinian people. The West Bank must not become the next battlefield. Settlement expansion and settler violence undermine the prospects of a viable way out of the crisis. Given the gravity of the situation on the ground, it is paramount to continue our support to the Palestinian Authority's reform pathway. Revamping the Palestinian Authority politically, financially, and through technical means in order to assist it in assuming also its responsibilities in Gaza. Cyprus is fully committed to this, particularly in view of our upcoming presidency of the European Union. A Palestinian state with the West Bank and Gaza as integral parts of it, and East Jerusalem as its capital, living side by side in peace and security with Israel is the aim. Ladies and gentlemen, we are confident that this high-level international conference can further create the conditions necessary for a peaceful resolution of the conflict through effective and sustained diplomacy. It is a complex task, but an urgent one, and it's never too late. A peaceful Middle East will represent a new era that is so desperately needed. It will also deliver an ambitious source of opportunities for a more prosperous, more interconnected, and more integrated region with mutual benefits for all its people and beyond. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Cyprus. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Sierra Leone.
Distinguished co-chairs, excellencies, Sierra Leone thanks the co-chairs, the Republic of France and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia for convening this high-level international conference on the peaceful settlement of the question of Palestine and the implementation of the two-state solution pursuant to a General Assembly mandate. We view this conference as an historic opportunity to reflect on the consequences of an incomplete political process and to recommit to a just and lasting settlement. It also reaffirms the international community's responsibility to uphold the principles of the UN Charter, international law, and multilateralism at a time when the credibility of our institutions is being tested. This meeting takes place against the backdrop of growing international recognition of the state of Palestine and renewed calls to implement the two-state solution. Yet, more than 7 decades after the adoption of Resolution 181 of 1947, the vision of two sovereign states, Israel and Palestine, living side by side in peace and security, remains unfulfilled. The ongoing Israeli occupation, which has persisted for decades, is a core obstacle to peace. Its end is not only a legal requirement, but also a moral and political imperative. Excellencies, the atrocities committed on and since the attack on 7th October 2023 has once again highlighted the urgency of addressing the root cause of this protracted conflict. While peace may ultimately depend on the parties themselves, the occupying power bears responsibility under international law. Without firm and sustained international resolve, however, the conflict will escalate and peace will remain elusive. Sierra Leone will underscore 4 interrelated priorities. First, peace cannot be achieved without an immediate and unconditional ceasefire in Gaza. The humanitarian catastrophe unfolding in Gaza is entirely man-made by the government of Israel and must end. Civilians, particularly women and children, have borne the brunt of indiscriminate violence, siege, and deprivation. We call for the cessation of hostilities and the release of all hostages held by Hamas and other armed groups, and the unimpeded delivery of humanitarian assistance in accordance with international humanitarian law. The international community must ensure full respect for the principles of humanity, neutrality, and proportionality in all actions. Second, Sierra Leone reaffirms its unwavering support for the two-state solution grounded in international law and relevant UN resolutions. This is not merely a political choice, but a legal obligation derived from the UN Charter and the guidance of the International Court of Justice. Sierra Leone recognized the State of Palestine on 3rd December 1988 and has consistently advocated for its full admission as a member of the United Nations. We welcome the announced recognition by France and the United Kingdom this year, which reflects a growing international consensus that recognition of Palestinian statehood is integral to achieving peace. At the same time, Israel has the right to exist in peace and security, free from threat and attack. We reiterate our strong condemnation of the heinous attacks carried out by Hamas on 7th October 2023 against Israeli civilians, including the taking of hostages. All armed groups must disarm and renounce violence, paving the way for demilitarization of Palestinian territories and the restoration of trust necessary for peace and security for both Israel and Palestine. Third, international law must remain the foundation of all efforts towards peace. The International Court of Justice advisory opinion of 9 July 2004 on the legal consequences of the construction of a wall in occupied Palestinian territory affirmed that Israeli settlements violate international law. The court's more recent advisory opinion of 19 July 2024 concluded that Israel's continued presence in occupied Palestinian territory is unlawful and must end as rapidly as possible. These legal findings leave no room for ambiguity. The occupation is illegal. Settlement must be dismantled. States have an obligation not to recognize, aid, or assist unlawful actions. Those who support policies that contravene international law risk incurring international responsibility. The same applies to violations that may amount to genocide or other serious crimes under international law. In this regard, Sierra Leone notes the ongoing proceedings before the ICJ initiated by the Republic of South Africa under the Genocide Convention. Accountability, including through independent investigations, is indispensable to justice and reconciliation. Fourth, a comprehensive approach to peace must address not only the end of occupation, but also the conditions necessary for coexistence. All parties must guarantee civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights, including the right to life, liberty, security, education, and freedom of expression. Ensuring these rights foster trust, justice, and reconciliation, particularly where violations have occurred. Excellencies, the ongoing conflict in Gaza and the West Bank is a stark reminder that peace cannot be imposed by force. Unless the legitimate concerns of both Israelis and Palestinians are addressed, that is, Israel's security and Palestinian freedom from occupation, right to self-determination, violence will persist. The international community must use its collective influence to support a political process that delivers concrete results. This conference must therefore go beyond declarations. It must generate actionable outcomes to end the occupation, halt settlement expansion, ensure accountability, and create conditions for two states to live side by side in peace and security. Women and youth who have borne disproportionate burdens during this conflict must be fully included in all peace and peace-building efforts as mandated by the Women Peace and Youth Peace and Security agendas. In conclusion, Sierra Leone stresses that the status quo is unsustainable. This conference represents a critical opportunity to break the cycle of violence and impunity. We urge all parties to engage in good faith dialogue and to respect the outcomes of this conference. Sierra Leone stands ready to work with all partners to advance a just, comprehensive, and lasting settlement of the question of Palestine, particularly in our current tenure in the Security Council. I thank you.
أشكر الممثل الموقر لسيراليون.
I thank the distinguished representative of Sierra Leone. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Republic of Korea.
Co-chairs, excellencies, and distinguished delegates, I would like to join other delegations to thank the French Republic and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia for hosting this meaningful conference regarding the two-state solution. Following Hamas' attack on October 7th, the armed conflict in Gaza has continued for more than 21 months. We are deeply concerned over the dire humanitarian situation and the hostages in Gaza, thereby undermining the viability of a two-state solution. In this regard, we consider this high-level conference to be very important and timely. It is high time that a ceasefire be reached without further delay. Once again, the government of the Republic of Korea appreciates the diplomatic efforts made by Egypt, Qatar, and the United States as mediators, and urges all parties to work in good faith in the ceasefire negotiations. Excellencies, the government of the Republic of Korea has joined the efforts made by the international community. Korea, as a member of the United Nations Security Council, has actively engaged in many resolutions calling for a ceasefire and the release of all hostages. The Korean government deeply understands the Palestinian people's aspiration to establish their own state, and we have consistently supported the two-state solution as the only viable way to resolve the Israel-Palestine issue and build permanent peace. The Korean government will continue to engage in the serious discussions of the international community regarding the recognition of Palestinian statehood. In acknowledgement of Palestine's capacity-building needs for future state development, Korea has provided support in its areas of expertise, such as healthcare, education, and public administration. In particular, Korea has provided a total of $106 million in ODA for Palestine through various projects, such as the establishment of the public rehabilitation therapy centers, enhancement of food and pharmaceutical traceability systems, vocational training, ICT equipment support, strengthening of e-government systems, and establishment of a civil servant training institute. The Republic of Korea remains committed to educational and training support to enable young Palestinians to shape their future with dignity and independence. We will work closely with Palestine to find empowerment programs in line with the National Development Pact for the future of Palestine. The Korean government has also steadily increased its regular contributions to the relevant UN agencies, including UNRWA, as well as humanitarian aid to Palestinians. We believe there is a need for the safe, rapid, and unimpeded delivery of UN-led humanitarian aid. Taking this opportunity, we are pleased to announce that Korea has provided an additional $30 million in humanitarian aid to civilians affected by the situation in Gaza this year. We hope that this assistance will lead to improvements in the humanitarian situation in Gaza, particularly regarding food, water, healthcare, education, and shelter. Excellencies, in the face of this unprecedented crisis, we are gathered here to once again light the torch of hope for a political horizon. The Korean government reaffirms its commitment to play its active part in the international efforts to build peace and stability based on the two-state solution. I thank you.
أشكر
I thank the distinguished representative of the Republic of Korea. We have exhausted the time available for the general debate for this meeting. The general debate will continue tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. in this hall. The meeting is adjourned.